I'm Helen Paynter. I'm tutor in Old Testament at the Bristol Baptist College, and I'm director of the Centre for the Study of Bible and Violence. I'm very interested in the way that Scripture is weaponised, very interested and concerned about the way that Scripture is weaponised in the contemporary world. And so I've been looking at a number of areas in which it's weaponised. I've looked at domestic abuse, for example. I've looked at the Israel-Palestine situation. But recently I've been leading a project looking at the use of Scripture by far-right movements. And published a previous book with SCM on that. And then David of SCM contacted me and said, how about writing a toolkit for churches? And I said, absolutely not. But I will edit a toolkit for churches because there's a lot of people doing some brilliant stuff out there, and I wanted to bring some of their voices together. To be honest, the project could have been twice as long, but you've got to stop somewhere. So I've got about 20 different voices of people who are doing some amazing work in a whole variety of areas. And it's been a privilege to pull those voices together and to set them out, and I'm really hoping it'll prove useful to the church. So the book is looking to help busy church leaders and others who are concerned, of course, to think about some small, practical, doable things which they can do, which will make a difference in our current polarised and, quite frankly, sometimes hateful climate. Michael Mosley, the TV doctor, had a podcast series and a series of programs called Just One Thing or One Small Thing, and that's the kind of vision that I'm trying to do here. Actually, many churches are doing amazing things that are really helpful already. So, in one sense, I'm hoping that readers will look at it and say, "Oh, yeah, I'm doing those things," or our church is doing those things already. But here's another idea of something, not huge, not like climbing a mountain, but something that can be done, which can make a difference. I think churches are facing a number of things. I think many churches are troubled by polarisation in wider society, and sometimes polarisation within the church congregation itself. I think churches particularly church leaders, are concerned when they see members of the congregation being attracted by the kind of religious slogans and symbols that some of these groups are using. It's very easy to fly a flag that says Christ is King, but when we say Christ is King in the church, we mean something that is deep, that is rich. We're thinking about the King who comes into Jerusalem on a donkey. We're thinking about the King who washes his disciples' feet. We're thinking about the King who wears a Roman crown of thorns. Now, when some of these movements fly the banner that says Christ is King, they're not appealing to any of that story. They're not wanting to invoke any of that. They're simply wanting to use it as a slogan to promote a particular political way of being. So I think church leaders are concerned when they see members of the congregation being attracted by those, and they want resources to think about how to have good conversations, and I hope that the book will help with that. Dan Green, who worked for a long time with a Bristol organisation called Bridges for Communities, has written a wonderful chapter in the book about hosting what he calls a peace feast. And we have them quite regularly in Bristol. I've been to one or two of them. Peace feasts gather together people from a whole range of walks of life and ethnicity around wonderful food and stories and sometimes music and sometimes dancing. And they're beautiful places to build love and understanding of people who are not like each other. So Dan writes a lovely chapter about how to host a peace feast and to think about whether people want to replicate that exact model, but to think about ways of being with those who are different from us, because when we spend time with people who aren't like us, we often end up understanding and loving them better. So it's structured in 7 sections, and each of the sections has got a number of contributions within it. I wanted it to be really positive, so most of the sections are very intentionally positively framed. The first one's about young people. Young people can be quite susceptible to being groomed by some of these movements. And as we probably all know, youth work has been substantially defunded in the last decade or two in this country. So we've got a section around how to make our churches places that are welcoming and genuinely inclusive of young people, really involve them in the life of the local church, so they're much less likely to be susceptible to the kind of pseudo-communities that some of these groups offer. Then we've got a section around seeking to promote intercultural understanding and compassion. It's really interesting that sometimes people who are very resistant and hostile towards refugees coming to this country, for example, when they actually meet some and hear some of the stories of pain and conflict and often torture that these people have fled, they often do change their perspective. One of the real needs is for theological maturity, biblical literacy in our churches, but also for enough religious literacy to understand other people's faiths as well. So we've got a whole section around how we deepen our own religious biblical literacy, but also how we can learn to understand and respect the faith of others. We've got a whole section offering some tools about how we can help our congregations to think critically, which is a skill that is not as widespread as we might wish. How we can dialogue generously and learn to listen well. And then there's two other sections. One is it's helping us to think about some of the traps that we might fall into if we are unwary. And the final section is offering a couple of resources, a study resource by one of my colleagues from the Centre for the Study of Bible and Violence, and a kind of a declaration which churches might want to consider making or adapting to their own context. I'm hoping that it's the sort of book that you can read on the bus, just a chapter on your way home or whatever. So it's something to dip into, not something that needs to be read, and really focused on and concentrated hard on from beginning to end. But I'm hoping that as people do dip into it, that they'll really gain some tools, but also some inspiration. There's a lot of anxiety about this issue. And while it's really important that we are attentive to it and that we think about the deep griefs and wounds and polarisation that are coming to the fore in these times, we mustn't ignore those at all. But anxiety is not the best way to respond to that. And I hope that the book will be encouraging enough and inspiring enough to be helpful and constructive, but not to build anxiety, in fact maybe to defuse anxiety a little bit along the way as well.